Emily Windsnap and the Monster from the Deep, starting at page 80. I didn't have long to dwell on it. All thoughts were catapulted out of my mind by an explosion of rocks as the cave shook even more violently. A column that looked like marble fell into the water with a mighty splash. Forest of stalagmites shuddered and trembled. I looked up to see Mom gripping the bench. Millie was holding her arm and looking serene as anyone can look when they're sitting on a bench that seems to be doubling as a seaside rodeo horse. Where was Dad? I scanned the pools and then saw him. Terror on his face, he was hurtling across the pool. "Emily!" he cried into my hair as he pulled me toward him. I grabbed onto him while the caves crashed and crumbled all around us. It was growing louder. It sounded like thunder, cracking right over our heads, coming from everywhere. And then something happened. Something almost familiar. I almost knew it was going to happen, almost remembered it from somewhere else. The shaking stopped. Just like that, the sudden stillness was almost as much of a shock as the violent movement that had come before it, throwing people across the floor, dunking merfolk under the water. I gripped Dad so hard it must have hurt him. He held me close. "Look," someone was calling out. I turned to see where everyone was looking. The caves were splitting. A crack opened up, starting from the base, shaking and creaking as it crumbled open. The whole thing would fall in on us. We'd be buried alive. Oh God, the monster! The monster! It was here! I fought back waves of terror, but I soon realized that nothing else was moving. Just one section of the caves was splitting open, almost like a hidden door, almost as though it was being opened by someone, or something, or Neptune. The caves had split wide and high enough to let in a thick shaft of sunlight. I had to cover my eyes. When I opened them, I saw him, riding into the caves, shrouded by dusty sunbeams. First the dolphins, then the chariot, gold and grand, carrying Neptune into the caves. I should have known I'd be found out. His voice burst into my memory so clearly I could almost hear it. The memory so sharp, standing in front of him in his courtroom, listening to him tell us we'd be spared prison on the condition we'd come to this island. "If you break this condition, you will be punished most severely," he'd added in that booming voice of his. Had I broken it? What would he do to me? The dolphins pulled Neptune into the center of the caves before swimming back into the corners, surrounding us like bodyguards. Archie swam beside the chariot. Pausing to wait for silence, Neptune rose in his seat, lifting his trident in the air. As he waved it above his head, the cave closed again, sealing us together to face his wrath. I knew what that was like. Knowing I was to face it again was almost enough to make me give up hope altogether. Neptune looked around the caves. "Do you know why I am here?" he asked, his deep voice grave. His sentence echoed over and over. "Know why I am here. Know why. Know why." No one dared to answer. No one knew. Almost no one. He was here for me. I was sure of it. I tried to calm my thumping chest before Dad heard it. "I shall ask another question," he said, his voice ringing around the caves. "Do you know why you are here?" He looked around, narrowing his eyes. I willed myself to shrink into nothingness. Luckily, his gaze passed me by. More silence. Neptune clicked his fingers. At once, a line of seahorses appeared at the side of the caves. They gathered into a perfect formation and swam toward him. Then, hooking his golden gown in their tails, they raised it up behind him. Neptune sat down and nodded curtly, his diamond-studded tail fanning out in front of him. The seahorses instantly darted away. "I will tell you," Neptune said. "You are here because of me, because of my generosity. This island hasn't always been the happy little paradise you have here today. This was once a place of grave importance." He banged his trident on a rock. "Archivo!" Archie swam forward. Then, bowing low, he kissed Neptune's tail. "Your Majesty," he said solemnly. I've never seen Archie look like this. He had a gold sash running along his tail. His hair was tied back in a neat ponytail and seemed to shine with splashes of deep green against the pool's reflection. "Tell these folk their history," Neptune said coldly. "It's about time they were reminded. Then he sat back in his chariot, waving his trident at Archie to beckon him forward. The caves became silent as we waited for Archie to speak. He cleared his throat. Many years ago, he began, life here was very different. The Bermuda Triangle was an important stronghold. Together with a most trusty servant of Neptune's, our bravest sirens worked well here in the rich waters around All Points Island. Archie paused. His tail flicked nervously. His cheeks had reddened a touch. This is where ships were brought down. They were relieved of their riches, which were returned to the rightful owner of all that passes on the oceans. Ships were brought down. That wasn't what he told us on the way here. He just said that they disappeared, not that they were brought down on purpose. Right here. Was our new home one of those ships? Maybe someone had died in my bedroom. My mind swirled with grim and gruesome images, bodies under my bed, killed by the trusty servant. Did he mean the monster? This place wasn't paradise at all. It was more like a setting for a new horror film. I could hardly concentrate as Neptune started talking again. Thank you, Archibald. And then what happened? Archie glanced back at Neptune before clearing his throat again. The trusty servant I told you about. One day he... Tell them when, Neptune exploded. Almost 100 years ago. Exactly. Not 192 years ago. Do you hear me? 92. That is my point. As he shouted, a wave washed through the pool. I held on to Dad to steady myself. Neptune sat back down in his chariot, his face purple with rage. He clicked his fingers, and a dolphin rushed forward, turning onto its back. It flapped its tail in front of Neptune's face like a fan. After a while, Neptune cooled down, and he waved the dolphin away. He motioned to Archie once again. Continued. 92 years ago, this trusty servant went to sleep. Dad pulled away from me. You're talking in riddles, Archie. What was he doing? Had he forgotten how powerful Neptune was? Or that it was only thanks to him that we were here? Or how easy it would be for Neptune to send him back to prison? He let go of me and swam toward Archie. Tell us what this is all about. Who is the trusty servant that you keep mentioning? If you're telling us a story, tell us the whole thing. Archie glanced at Neptune, who shrugged disdainfully. All right, Archie said, I'll tell you. He took a deep breath. I'm talking about the Kraken. The cave filled with sound, people whispering, talking, gasping, merpeople turning to each other with questions on their faces and fear in their eyes. A mergirl from my class was in front of me in the water. What's the Kraken? I asked in a whisper. I think in my heart I already knew. It's a huge, fierce monster, she whispered back. It's just a myth, though. It's not real. She turned back to face Archie, or at least that's what we've always thought. My body shook. My tail was spinning so vigorously the water was frothing around me. A mermaid I didn't recognize held up her hand. She had deep wrinkles in her face and piercing blue eyes. Archibald, if this is true, why didn't our parents tell us about it? My great-grandparents would have been alive while it was around. Surely they would have passed this on. Archie glanced once more at Neptune for approval, a brief nod in reply. The merfolk who lived here at that time were the Kraken's keepers. The Kraken works for 100 years, then sleeps for another 100. The last time it went to sleep, one small ship somehow managed to find its way through the triangle's border. With no Kraken to bring it down, the ship ended up here. Archie looked at the people sitting along the stone benches. Those folk were your ancestors, he said. But we don't know anything about this. One of the women called down. I recognized her from one of the ships in our bay. Surely someone would have told us. Once the people had landed on the island, it turned out that many of the merfolk were happy for them to stay. In a short time, friendships were formed. Apart from a very small number of Kraken keepers who were assigned to special duties elsewhere, most of the merfolk decided to stay here, as did most of the humans. You haven't answered my question, the woman shouted. Memory drug, Archie said simply. They volunteered. That was their choice. All of them? The woman insisted. The merfolk too? We can use it on anyone, Archie replied, and it will wipe out almost everything. What remains, well, you have all heard half-tales, stories you never quite knew what to make of, myths passed on and distorted with every telling. Archie's words were slowly filtering into my brain. I didn't want to understand, didn't dare to follow his thinking to its logical conclusion, but the memory drug, well, I knew all about that. It was what my mom had been given for 12 years, so she wouldn't remember that she was married to a merman. Fed to her in so-called treats from her so-called friend Mr. Beeston, the so-called lighthouse keeper. He'd always given me the creeps. He used to drop by to visit Mom all the time for coffee and donuts. He never said a lot, but he just had this really odd manner. He'd look at me sideways, and his eyes were different colors, and his teeth were crooked. Well, he just made me feel uncomfortable. And then, when it turned out he'd been spying on us my entire life, it all made sense. I'd half forgiven him in the end when he helped me get back on Mandy Rushton. He used the memory drug on my class so no one would remember me turning into a mermaid. But he wasn't to be trusted, and neither was anyone else who went around doling on that drug. As you all know, Neptune is a just and kind ruler, Archie continued with a slight cough. He allowed them to live together here on the island. No one needed to know about the Kraken, not yet, and so you are here today. All Points Island has existed in this way for 92 years. A mermaid with glitter in her hair and a pink tail that flipped and splashed in the water raised her hand. But why are you telling us this? She asked in a timid voice. Why now? And who are you, anyway? We hardly know you. Neptune rose from his chariot, motioning Archie to move out of his way. Archivo works for me, he said, and he has told you your history. Now let me tell you something about your present. He sucked in his cheeks, clenching his teeth. Someone, he said almost in a whisper, someone has dared to challenge my power. He took a breath, lifting his trident in the air. Then, in a voice that shook the caves as much as his rival had, he bellowed, Someone woke the Kraken before its time. Darting backward and forward in the pool, agitated and angry, he spoke quickly. 8 more years. That's how long it had. That's how long it needed. That's when I would have been here for it. But no, someone couldn't wait that long. Someone had to wake it early. Do you know what happens when my Kraken has not had the sleep it needs? The caves responded with silence. No one was going to attempt to answer Neptune in this kind of mood. Not that he was known for having any other kind of mood. I'll tell you, it wakes in a rage, too much of a rage for even Neptune to calm it. My truly loyal servant, someone has robbed me of it. What will it do? Someone asked. The first signs are relatively small. It will lash around it in its lair, creating freak waves. This is what it does while it is still in its cave. As far as we know, it still is in there, but it will find its way to open seas sooner or later, and when it does, it will set out on the only path it knows. Neptune paused as he slowly surveyed the caves. Destruction. My tail was shaking again. It's okay, little one, Dad whispered, pulling me close. I'll look after you. He knew nothing. Nothing. That is why I am the only one who should wake the Kraken. The one who wakes it is the only one who... Neptune stopped abruptly. He smoothed back his hair and straightened his beard. Well, let me just tell you this. Without my direction, it can destroy anything in its wake. Perhaps this whole island will crumble from its rage. The end of the island, all because of me? I tried to swallow and found I couldn't. I had to fix this. Oh yes, continued Neptune, and you should know this. It can bring ships toward it. Apart from a few of my loyal aides, the Kraken is the only creature who knows how to pierce the magic of the Bermuda Triangle. Once the Kraken leaves its cave, you are no longer safe. Discovery cannot be far away. When this happens, the days of All Points Islands are numbered. Neptune sucked in his breath again. I have not yet decided what I shall do about you all. In the meantime, I want to know who did this. I will find out. It is imperative that he or she come to me. He stared around the caves in silence. An occasional drop of water plopped softly into the water. No, I couldn't. I wasn't going to get Mom and Dad thrown off the island. I wasn't going back to that awful jail. I had to think of something. Well, he bellowed. Then someone coughed gently. There was a bustling sound up on the stone benches. Someone was getting up. Millie, what on earth was she doing? She flung her black cape over her shoulder and stepped toward a barrier at the edge of the pool. Your Majesty, she said firmly, I'm not one to interfere, but I may be able to help you. Neptune almost smiled. He looked as though he was smiling anyway. It might just as easily have been anger twisting his face into a contorted frown. He pulled on his beard. Help me, he repeated. I can see things, Millie explained. I don't like to boast, but I have been told I have something of a gift. I just need your star sign. My star sign? Neptune yelled. Yes, you know, your horoscope. I know what you mean. It's Pisces, of course. Thank you, Millie said, through tight lips. That anger won't do your karma any good at all, she added in a stage whisper. Then she closed her eyes and folded her hands over her chest. I believe I can tell you exactly what has happened, she said. I just need some quiet. Neptune looked as though he was about to burst, but he didn't speak, nor did anyone else. Could she really see what had happened? Millie's cosmic ways didn't often come to much, but she did have an accurate moment now and then. What if this was one of them? I see riches of some sort, Millie murmured. What is it? Gold? Let me focus. Gold? She was describing the cave. No! Trust Millie to have one of her flukes and get it right when I desperately needed her to come out with her usual wacky nonsense. I'd heard nothing. I had to get out before she told them everything. Maybe her vision had me in it. I glanced up and tried to catch Mom's eye. She was watching Millie with a look of admiration on her face. How would she look at me when she found out what I'd done? I couldn't bear to imagine it. I edged quietly away from Dad toward the darkness at the back of the pool. I could hear Millie's voice warbling across the water. She sounded as if she was humming. Everyone was watching her. This was my only chance. I'm sorry, I whispered into the darkness and slipped quietly away. I swam frantically through the dark tunnels, not even thinking about where they were leading me. I pounded past underwater stalagmites, faintly lit up with soft, glowing crystals, and twists and turns and crevasses, almost gasping for the sight of the sky. I had to get out of the caves, had to think. Eventually, I came out into the open water. The light shocked me. 2 little blue heads hovered at the cave's mouth, pecking at the rock as though giving it little kisses. A noise behind me, splashing. Someone was following me. I dived down into a thin cave under the rocks, stumbling upon a group of fat hogfish who looked up at me with black eyes before scattering away to find another den. I watched the cave's entrance. It was Dad. I swam out from under the rock. What are you doing here? Emily. He swam over toward me. Why have you run away? I retreated farther under the rocks. I've let you down. You, Mom, everyone. We'll get thrown off the island and it's all my fault. I'm so sorry. Dad squeezed into the grass with me, scattering clouds of sand as he slithered along the rock. No one's going to throw you off the island, little one. Why would they do that? You don't know, I wailed. You don't know what I've done. A tear snaked down my cheek, mingling with the water. All this time, all those years without him, and now that I've found him, I'd done something so stupid, so awful, he'd hate me forever. I'd ruined everything. What have you done? I bit hard on my lips, squeezing my eyes shut. Whatever it is, you can tell me. We'll figure out what to do together. My face was wet with tears. It was me, I blurted out. I woke the Kraken. You what? But how? I went exploring. I knew I shouldn't have, but I did. It was in a cave. I'm so stupid. I found it. I woke it up, Dad. I've ruined everything. I'll never be able to show my face on the island again. You've only just got out of prison and now... Oh, Dad, I'm sorry. Dad stroked my face. Look, I don't quite understand, but it'll be okay. We'll fix this. I'll look after you. I pushed his hand away. Dad, it won't be okay. Don't lie to me. I'm not a baby. He stared at me, his face red, as though I'd hit him. As I held his gaze, he nodded slowly, as though he was watching me grow up in front of his eyes, catching up with who I really was, instead of who he remembered me being. You're right, he said eventually. Of course you're not. He turned to swim away. Wait, I grabbed his arm. I'm sorry. You know what you are? He asked, his voice as tight as his mouth. I shook my head, holding back fresh tears. You're my daughter. That's what you are. You're a Windsnap, and you know what that means? Before I had a chance to answer, he added, it means we're going to straighten this out. I'm not going back to the meeting. I can't. Please. Who said anything about going back there? What? Then? Dad stopped swimming and searched my face. We're going to the cave. Show me where it happened. The Kraken's cave? Why not? You heard what Neptune said. It's probably still in there. Maybe we can straighten this mess out somehow, seal it back up so it's safe again or something. Dad, it was really frightening. It was the most terrifying thing ever. Worse than going back to face Neptune? You stood up to him in his own court, remember? I dropped my head. I know, that was pretty frightening too. Exactly, and you did that, so you can handle this as well, I suppose. Come on, he held out his hand. Let's see what we can do. Letting out a breath, it felt as if I'd been holding in for a week. I took his hand and we swam on. It's that way, I said as we came to the lagoon. It looked different. The water was murky and muddier than I remembered. Sand-colored flat fish skimmed over the seabed, moving beneath us like shifting ground. My throat closed up. We'd reached the carving on the wall, the trident. How on earth could we have missed it last time? Maybe if we'd seen it, none of this would have happened. It was pointless thinking like that. We came to the pinwheel, except this time when I looked at it, I realized I knew exactly what it was. The long chutes spiraling out from the round body in the center. That's it, I said, my voice rippling like a breaking wave. I don't want to go any farther. He stopped swimming. We need to do this, Emily. Dad, you know, it's okay if you want to call me. No. He put a finger over my lips. In charge. Strong. You're not a baby. You're a scale off the old tail, and I couldn't be more proud of you. And we're going to get to the bottom of this, find out what we can, right? But it's out of bounds. This was how the whole trouble started, and this is how it'll end too, he said. You don't think we found ourselves at this place by the pair of us doing what we are told, do you? I didn't say anything. He reached out for my hand. Come on, I'll go ahead, but you need to tell me where I'm going. I'll look after you. Eventually, I took his hand and we swam in silence. Everything looked familiar until we came to an enormous gash in the rock, maybe the size of a house. In there. I held out a shaky arm, except it was a tiny hole last time. Dad swallowed. Okay, then. You ready? I'll never be ready to go back in there. A solitary fish flashed past me. Soft green on one side, bright blue on the other. Its see-through fin stretched back as it swam away from the cave. Sensible fish. Come on, you'll be okay. I'm right beside you. He squeezed my hand and we edged inside, slipping back through the rock. But it was completely different. So different that I started to wonder if we were in the wrong place. There were no thin, winding channels, just huge, gaping chasms all the way. We swam through them all. And then we came to the gold. We were in the right place. Jewels and crystals lay scattered across the seabed. As we swam lower, the surroundings felt less familiar, colder, and there was something else, something very different. The deeper we got, the more we saw of them. Bones. Just a few at first. That could perhaps have passed for driftwood. Then more, clumps of them, piled up like the remains of a huge banquet. Long, thin bones, twisty fat ones, and then a skull lying on the seafloor. A dark fish slipped through an eye socket. I clapped a hand across my mouth. Dad, I gripped his hand so hard I felt his knuckles crack. Don't look at them, he said, his voice wobbling. Just stay close to me. We swam into every bit of the cave, every inch. What do you see? Dad asked as we paused in the center of the big chasm. I looked around. Nothing. Exactly, he turned to face me. Suddenly not in charge anymore, not strong, just scared. It's gone, Emily. The Kraken. It's on the loose. Mandy story. How long have we been here? A couple of days? Who knows? All I know is we're stranded on a deserted scrap of an island, the boat's broken, and I'm hungry and scared. Nuts. How long can a person live on nuts and water from an iffy-looking stream? Dad figures he'll catch us some fish, and he thinks we could fix the boat if we all shaped up a little. He's acting as if he's on some kind of Boy Scout trip, as if this is all part of the adventure. I know he's putting it on, though. It's too manic. I can see the truth in his eyes. He's just as scared as I am. Mom's hardly spoken. It's best that way. If we talked more, we might end up talking about what happened and how could we have died. Anyway, it's hardly even an island. I can vaguely see something that might be a real island out at sea. Far too far to swim. Just our luck to get stranded on this tiny speck of land instead, 200 paces from one side to the other. I counted yesterday, or the day before. I don't remember. Sometime when I was collecting twigs so that Dad could build us a so-called shelter. Not that I'm likely to get any sleep. It lends itself to a touch of insomnia, getting stranded on an island the size of a pair of underpants, with nothing to eat, no way of getting home, and no one to talk to except your parents, not even the captain. That's another thing we don't talk about. I try not to think about that either. What happened to him? Could he be... My hands started to shake uncontrollably. My legs feel as if they'll give way any second now. Like I said, best not to think about that. There's a splashing noise behind me. Mandy, where's your mom? It's Dad coming out of the water with one of the nets from the boat. He's wearing purple shorts down to his knees, and he's waddling onto shore in his flippers. He's been off looking for fish. That's all he's done since we've been here. That and mess around banging and hammering on the boat. It's washed up on the tiny beach, half filled with water and littered with shells and stones and broken bottles. Yeah, sure, Dad, it's going to be easy to fix. So easy. The net's empty, as usual. Dad pulls his mask and snorkel off. He's grinning. What on earth can he find to smile about? Doesn't he realize we're stranded and we're all going to die? Maybe he got knocked on the head when the boat went under. He's shaking himself dry. Come with me. I've got something important to tell you both. I follow him back to the pathetic bundle of twigs that seems to have become our home. Mom's sitting on the ground, leaning against a palm tree. She's not doing anything, just staring into space. Her hair is sticking out everywhere, as though she's had an electric shock. Her face is white, her eyes unfocused. She looks like a mad woman. Maureen, Mandy, our problems are over, Dad announces. I can't help it. I burst out laughing. I mean, look around, Dad. Wake up and smell the coffee. Oh, sorry, I forgot. There isn't any coffee because we're marooned on a strip of land you could miss if you blinked, with nothing but nuts, insects, and a smashed-up boat for company. Just hear me out, Dad says. You're not going to believe me, but I swear every word is true. There's a tick beating against his red cheek. I swear, he repeats. Mom sighs. Just tell us, what ridiculous idea have you come up with now? It's not an idea, Mo. Well, not exactly. It's something I've seen. Mom raises her head a fraction. What have you seen, then? Dad puffs out his chest and looks from one of us to the other. Mermaids. I watch a lump in his throat bob up and down. I've seen mermaids. Oh, for heaven's sake, Jack. Mom pulls herself up and shakes out her skirt. When are you going to act like a proper man and fix this mess rather than indulging your stupid fantasies? She starts to walk off, wiping sand off the backs of her legs. Dad grabs her arm. It is not a fantasy, Maureen, he says furiously. I swear on every breath I've ever taken, there are mermaids. Not here, farther out. I've seen them swimming under the water. They've got tails, long, glistening, shining tails. Their eyes are locked. It's as if they're acting out some surreal sketch, and the teacher has just said, okay, freeze, everybody. But there's something about what he said, something just out of reach. Don't you understand what this means, Dad says, his neck's bright red and bulging. He's gripping Mom's arm. Mom stares at him. No, Jack, I'm afraid I don't know what it all means at all. You're cracking up, perhaps. Well, don't worry. I'm sure I won't be far behind. She pulls out of his grip. Mo, I'm not cracking up, he shouts. You've got to believe me. We could save our home, the amusement arcade, the whole pier. He turns to me, his eyes wild and intense. Mandy, you believe me, don't you? Of course I don't believe him. Of course I don't. But there's something. What is it? Mom's shaking her head. You'll forgive me if I don't quite follow your logic. Dad holds up his net. We capture one, take it back to Brightport. We can have it on show, charge admission and everything. We'll take care of it and, of course, give it a good life. People will travel from all over the country to see it, from all over the world, maybe. We'll be heroes in town. We'll pay for the pier to be renovated. Don't you see? This could solve all our problems. Mom sucks in her cheeks. Jack, she says, you haven't managed to catch so much as a goldfish since we got here, even if I were to believe that you had seen a mermaid, which frankly I don't. How in heaven do you propose to catch the thing? Dad pulls at his net. I haven't got the whole plan figured out yet, have I? I've only just seen them. A group of them, swimming in the deep water. One of them had gold stars shining in her tail. There was a merman, too, with long black hair and a shiny silver tail. A merman? For God's sake, Maureen. He grips her arm again. I'm telling the truth. You'll see I am. Mom pulls away and turns to me. Come on, Mandy. Help me get some dinner. I've had enough of your father and his daydreams for one afternoon. I follow Mom as we pick our way through the undergrowth, scavenging for food like vagrants. As usual, we don't talk. but this time it's because of the thoughts going around in my head, thoughts I'm not sure I dare share with Mom. There's definitely something familiar about what Dad said, something niggling away in the back of my mind. I can't put my finger on it. Maybe it's something I've seen on TV, a film about mermaids or something. I've got this picture in my mind. Someone swimming. She's got a tail and she's spinning around, smiling, grinning at me. She's in a pool. It's not from TV. I'm sure it isn't. It feels real. It feels like a memory. I grab a couple of nuts and shove them hard into my pocket. Mermaids, as if. I force myself to laugh. We better get away from here before all crack up. That's the end of chapter 4.